Now will you please join me in a moment of relaxation. Sit up straight. Gently close your eyes. And just begin to breathe more deeply in the region of your diaphragm. Exhale and inhale, letting that life force travel through your body and mind. Exhale away all your tensions, anxieties, and inhale fresh vitality. And now just open your eyes. There's an ancient book called the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of the Lord. It's actually part of a much larger book, which goes for over 300,000 pages. It's called the Mahabharata. It's a strange book because on the one hand it's a masterpiece of spiritual writing, and on the other hand it's a story of a battle where people are killing each other, people who love each other. What a strange paradox. But the centerpiece of that story, the Bhagavad Gita, is a dialogue that precedes the battle. It's a dialogue between a man who's driving a charioteer and the soldier who's about to do battle with his relatives over an age-old feud that came up in the family. It's translated into English. In fact, Swami has written a remarkable commentary on it. The reason I chose that to launch our talk this morning is because the book itself is a symbol of life. We go to these ancient classics not merely to revere them for their ancestry or the fact that they're still around as relics, but they can speak to us. They say something that's still relevant, that can touch the strings of our soul. And so we hear a chord, a sound, if you will, that appeals to us. We go to the Bibles of the world, the scriptures, for the same reason. You and I can't go back into history. We can't relive what Arjuna, the charioteer, was attempting on that battlefield. But in our own lives, we do become the Arjunas of the 21st century. The word itself, the man's name, Arjuna, means one who strives, one who aspires. And that characterizes us all on the spiritual path. For life itself really is a spiritual battlefield. There are things we have to destroy. It seems so strange to use words like destruction, annihilation, but it is true on the surface. Your lifestyle, then, is really the strategies that you're going to employ in striving after your spiritual quest, whatever that may be. In fact, you're going to have to write your own story. You have begun already. When you were born, your life began to unfold. That's the opening chapter. You journey through the pages of your life, writing the various chapters, which are called the stages of your life. Some of those stages involve crises, where you're confronted on 3 different levels. First, you're confronted with your limitations. You realize you can't do everything. As a child, you thought your mother was perhaps the prettiest woman on the block, and your daddy was the strongest. But one day you discovered that wasn't quite true. It may have been shattering. Or you may have been going through some kind of moral crisis at that time when you discovered that a friend, someone you had relied upon for all sorts of things, suddenly betrayed you. And that can be a very, very shattering experience. It can keep you in the doldrums and a fit of despair for months. When Arjuna discovered he had to battle his own relatives in order to gain what was rightfully his, he quit. He went into a slump. And he complained to his charioteer, the great Krishna, how can I go out and slay those whom I've loved? And there begins a dialogue, because Krishna is the symbol of your conscience. Your conscience is the passageway to the deeper states, as Roy has told you about. Your conscience, in a way, has all the keys to the wisdom that you need in order to get through the crises that's afflicting you right now. You're surrounded by gloom, confusion, pain. You don't know where to turn. You want to just withdraw, just like Arjuna. He didn't want to go into battle anymore. He wanted to retire and become a hermit. The easy way. Because he didn't know what else to do. And so there are moments when we build this story of our life, when we reach these epic crossroads, where we are unable to know where to go, who to talk to, and we don't want to be involved. This is a very normal reaction. We see all the limitations of ourselves usually in the crises. We rehearse all the past. Why did I do this? How could this have come about? What did I do wrong? What could I have done to avoid this? Probably nothing. There's more here involved than your mistakes, than your struggles and your sincere efforts. There's much more involved. So when we meet a crisis, then we also meet our illusions. We begin to discover that some of the things that we thought were truth, were reality, really aren't. They're more our fantasy. Because the mind has a tendency sometimes to impose, to embellish. You don't have to be Irish to do that. We have a certain poetical strand in all of us. We like to make things a little more juicier than they really are. And sometimes in our optimism and our excitement and our efforts to enjoy life, we sometimes paint it and it's not really there. And we don't find that out until something goes wrong, something collapses. But in the midst of our illusions and in our limitations and finding about ourselves as we go through life, and we do this on all levels, you know. We do this physically when we stress and strain, and then one day the doctor tells us, hey, you're heading for a coronary. But we don't listen because, you know, it's only a small risk. We do this when we overinvest and we build up a whole huge pile of debts, and then one day we're running out of reserves and all the debtors come clamoring to our door. We do this sometimes when we're running around building up our careers and evading the responsibilities of raising our children, and we wonder why they're on drugs. We have to sit back sometimes in these crises and just think, what am I doing with my life? Now, there's a temptation to somehow think that that has nothing to do with spirituality. Yet it's all spirituality. There is no separation between spirituality and life. The very wharf and woof of everything you do in life is part of your spiritual journey. Don't ever separate them. There was a tendency. When I grew up, there was always that tendency, especially when you find those forms of spirituality that are involved in institutional religions. All religions require spirituality, but not all spiritualities require religions. And you may find a phase in your life, a stage in your life, where you need to go into a religious structure. That's the way you want to structure your energy, your spiritual energy. And it's important that you do. But then, too, you have to remember that all the structures that you put into your energy are always limited. They may have a value, and that value may bear you out for a number of years, but it's still limited. People sometimes overemphasize those structures, and then they get into problems. Sometimes, for example, you exaggerate your dependency upon a structure, and then you discover later on that it can no longer have the intrinsic value that it had at one period of your life. This is not unusual. Don't condemn the structure. Recognize its limitations. You need certain events in your life to support you, to get you through the tender periods of growth. Later on, you may decide you have to retire them. Don't banish them in negativity. Respect them for what they've given you. Some people are meant to go through institutional religions and remain, and they will achieve enlightenment. Other people are meant to go through that as a phase of their development. Only you can choose that. So when you involve yourself in the territory of spirituality, which is what Arjuna was involving himself in with Krishna, the territory for you is your life right now. It's your career. It's your family. It's your struggling to meet the bills, to raise the kids, to find out about your artistic personalities, all your hobbies that are available, all the vacation spots you want to pick. All of this is part of your spiritual journey. There is nothing that is superfluous. There is nothing that is neutral. So relax. Don't hold spirituality to the Sunday meetings in church, or to a novena, or a rosary, or reading the Bible. That's part of it, but that's only a small part. Reading is not going to necessarily give you enlightenment. Church attendance, no matter how many checks you have, is not necessarily going to give you enlightenment. So then where is this spiritual enlightenment that we've been talking about, that we're striving about, that we're reading about in all the epics? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. You and I then, all of us here, we've come to the Institute for these few days. This is also part of your journey. What will it give you depends an awful lot what you are willing to open yourself to. There's an old saying, when the beggar met the sage, all he could see was pockets. He couldn't see anything else because that was what he was structured into. He was a pickpocket. And so when he looked at people, all he looked for was pockets. He didn't see what was really there. Many things have passed you by already. But many things that have already come into your life you're not appreciating enough because you're only seeing them from one point of view. Sometimes you see people as a source of pain to you. And other people you've decided they're a source of joy and pleasure. But people are much more than that. Everyone that you meet in some way is an icon of who you are. Some aspect they're showing you about yourself. You have troubles with certain people? Look to yourself. Don't blame them. Why are you having problems with them? You keep putting the blame on them, you're not going to outgrow it. It's a revolving door. You keep coming back to yourself into that fix. If you're centered, then no one can threaten you. It's not possible. Because you're in that sense of oneness. Disturbance may be there, but you're not affected by it, but yet you're aware of it, and then you can handle it. As you go through life then, these stages and events that are occurring into your life, many of them are planned by you without you knowing it, because of the lifestyle you're leading. You're bound. It's inevitable. If I have a certain pattern of diet, certain things are going to take place in my body. And you say, well, how could this have happened to me? Well, you've been eating that way for the last 15 years. And now it's showing up finally. It took a while, but it's there. Why do I run out of breath when I go up 2 flights of stairs? Well, do you ever do exercise? Do you ever stimulate the cardiovascular system? Then you're taking on the consequences of that denial. Do you have problems with attitude? Do you ever sit down and examine yourself? What values do you hold dear? Are you still clinging to things that you held as a teenager? Do you have certain prejudices that you've never outgrown? Perhaps you grew up in a community that fostered them. You're still responsible because you're an intelligent being. You can reflect. On the other hand, are you taking advantage of what is in front of you? For example, do you ever go out into nature? You know, there's a whole forest of energy ready to give itself to you. I'm not simply being romantic. When Swami Rama used to send us all on 10-day retreats, he used to pick a bunch of the faculty out, and he'd send us into silence, which drove us crazy for the first 3 days. We'd have all kinds of weird dreams coming out. Ask Swami Ajaya, he can tell you all about it. But he always told us, make sure you get out into nature. Don't stay back into your rooms. And we began to realize after a few days of unwinding what he was getting at. You and I live in a world that wants to support us. But we have to know how to relate to it. Otherwise we see it as a threat. We think we're doomed now because of the possibility of Star Wars and nuclear explosions. That's a sort of cosmic anxiety that we all feel. And as you give yourself over to that, you close off to all the other enrichments that can alter that kind of fantasy. Nature is one of them. Everything in your body, all the elements, are already found in nature. And so you have an affinity to many things in the world. And if you don't realize that, you're not getting the nutrition that you need to grow spiritually. It's not that people are insincere spiritually. They're anemic spiritually. They've got the wrong diets. And they distort themselves. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of giving a retreat to a total order of nuns. The entire Franciscan order. It was wonderful being surrounded by 47 women. All ages, from 92 on down. And as we got to know each other and had a good time, and they began to trust a little bit in opening up, they sort of surprised me when they told me what their major fears were. Their constant fear was the fear of their body. They were afraid of growing old, they were afraid of dying, and they couldn't understand why they were getting sick. And when we went over their history, we talked about things, how they treated their body, their theology of their body, we began to see it was just too narrow. They never integrated themselves. They didn't have a holistic spirituality. They sort of had a mind trip. Spirituality was all up here, or just here. And they had a tendency to somehow downgrade the body. Now, that is a tendency I find in women. There are 3 things I find ready to trap women on the spiritual path, in my observations. First of all, there's a tendency to worry about the body. It's not attractive enough. It's getting too fat. I'm getting too tired. We have a tendency to then move from a state of not liking the body to almost loathing the body. And so we reach out for things like liposuction to get rid of, all the excess fat. We rush into diets and over to the spa. But we have to ask ourselves, women have to ask themselves, why? What do you want the body to do? What do you see the body's purpose as? Is it a sex vehicle? Is it simply a carrier of children? What is it for? And I think the clue we should go to, we should reach into and pull into our consciousness very, very deeply is what Paul, who seems at times to be the enemy of women, but if you read carefully into his letters, He calls the body a temple. Now there's nothing higher in terms of structure that man can create than a temple. Because the whole purpose of a temple is to have a divine indweller. And if you can cast the body into that metaphor, a temple, then you begin to reappreciate what the use of the body is all about. Your body basically is energy. That's all it is. Condensation of energy. And because it's energy, it can be altered. But even if it can't be altered, if you've reached a point where, due to genetic structure, the way your lifestyle has formed, you can alter your relationship to it, and then your feeling about the body will change, and people will sense that. So in holistic spirituality, it's very important that you see the body as a superlative medium for spirituality. You can't have spirituality without appreciating the body. You're not angels. You're not pure spirits. You have this body for a purpose, and that purpose is to reach the divine. So don't neglect it. Now, as your stages begin to unfold and you go through the chapters of your life, you will also find another tendency, a trap. Again, I'll go to women first. And that is, there's a tendency for women always to seek self-approval from others. To somehow feel that their identity has no meaning unless society, those they love, the men in their life, their children, their careers, somehow endorse that. Now, to a certain extent, that's necessary. We all need that. We all need ego approval. But don't make that the center of your nourishment. It's too fickle. Because you may have a past that's going to exceed your friends, that's going to go into a very novel route, and your friends may not approve of it. And you may have to stand alone at times. And so there's a tendency here to always, as it were, check in with someone. Am I doing the right thing? Up to a point that can help you. But there are moments when you're going to have to check into your own conscience and live with it and take the consequences. This is not easy. You can lose friends. We all have lost friends. Sometimes we outgrow friends. That's painful, but we have to. Sometimes friends can only stay a certain way. It's like walking along on a journey and suddenly you reach a crossroads and say, well, aren't you coming my way? No, I have to go this way. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's no need to get mad. You just have to recognize it. People have come into your life and have gone out of your life for better or for worse. That's necessary. Sometimes it even involves a disruption of your relationships in marriage. But that also may be part of your spiritual journey, that you had to go through that too, to learn something. As we grow then, we have to realize that even our most cherished ideas may have to be altered, perhaps even abandoned. Namely, our cherished ideas of God, ourself, and the world around us. St. John of the Cross, an interesting Spaniard in the 16th century, wrote a fascinating book about this journey. He called it the Ascent of Mount Carmel. And he describes in there that there comes a time when you're trying to discover the meaning of life, of why you're here, who you are, what is God, that you have to literally let go of all your preconceived notions. That is extremely painful because there's no immediate substitute that pops up. Well, here I am. Here's the new version. No. The reason you have to let go at times, at crucial times in your life, is because that particular notion is too limiting for your freedom. It'll stunt your growth if you hold on too long. Sometimes this can happen so that you sometimes get interesting ideas of competition. In America, there are over 400 versions of Christianity. And believe me, they don't all look alike. And you can get some of these curious competitive games going between people. Like, for example, I know a group that always chants this way: Hail Mary, full of grace. Let's keep the Protestants in second place. That is also a normal phase you have to go through. Huh? We got the truth. Our God is the real one. Yours is well, I won't say it. You have to get past that. You have to get past that. You have to realize that the people on the other side of the world, the Buddhists, those who live under the Islamic allegiance, those who are involved in many, many other paths that you and I have never heard of, let alone read about, they too have a God. They have an ultimate meaning of life. And it may not exactly tally with yours. How is this possible? If God has revealed himself, are you sure you got the right gender? If God has revealed who God is, how could we have so many different versions? Very simple. Whenever you encounter a magnificent reality, can you exhaust it in words? Can you really convince someone of what you went through? You can write it page after page after page. You can even have pictures if you want. But the actual experience is always more than what the mind itself can contain. And that's why you have to have a whole slew of Bibles. And that's why every Bible has to have many chapters. Look at the words, for example. Go through the Torah or the Old Testament sometime and see all the various ways God is described. They're not all male. Why? Because there's no way you can put this colossal experience, infinite if you wish to call it, into the finite categories of your mind. Have you ever heard anyone say to you, I can tell you everything there is about this person? If they do, then they don't understand that person. When you fall in love, you can't describe it. The feelings, the truth of those feelings are too rich to be described. You try in the poetic language you have. So in the spiritual journey, there are times when your treasured thoughts, your most cherished beliefs, your dogmas, if you will, somehow don't match the experience anymore. This creates a crisis, but it's a healthy one. For a while you go through a period where you think everything's relative, it doesn't matter, there's no meaning to life, it doesn't. That's still a growth process that's meant to shake you up so that you don't cling to these older concepts which are much too limiting for you. You need to stretch out. Gradually you begin to put order back into your life. When Emanuel Swedenborg, at the age of 55, had his midlife crises, he didn't know what he was going to do with himself anymore. He was wealthy. He had written over 200 books. He was well respected. He then decided he wanted to pursue what the soul was all about. At first he thought it was in the blood, because when you lose enough blood, you die. And he said, no, that's too crass. Then he discovered it had to be only one place, in my mind somewhere. How do you get into the mind? He began to meditate. And he began to realize that his religion, the Lutheran religion, the state religion of Sweden, was much too limiting. It doesn't mean it didn't have the truth, but the truth it had was still too limiting. He said there was much more than what they had seen. And so he had to reconcile that in himself because he was a very devout man. All of us have to go through these times where we have to return to what we think we know and revise it